So how do you manage the demands of your trainings with travel? Now, that's something that I'm going to discuss today, or at least I'm going to share with you how I do it. And the first thing you have to kind of figure out is, where in your training block are you? So how much training do you have to do? Where are you going to be traveling to? What's the temperature going to be like? What's the environment going to be like? What are the running conditions and options going to be like? And what type of travel is it? Is it personal travel, so leisure, where it's just you, your partner, your family, maybe it's just you? Or is it business travel, where you have obligations at set times? All of those things go into how I plan for my travel. So, as you can tell right now, I'm not in Amsterdam. That's kind of evident by the fact that it's sunny and there's no clouds and, well, maybe the palm trees also. My wife and I are in Spain for the week, and it's right in the middle of my training block. So I had to take all of this stuff into consideration when we started to plan this trip, or actually after we planned this trip before we left. So I'm on my way to pick us up some breakfast and some coffee. Let's chat about this on the way. Oh, look at that sun. We literally came here to the south of Spain to bask in the sun. It's one of the things we miss the most in the winters in Amsterdam. It's not crazy warm here right now, significantly warmer than it is in Amsterdam, but it's the sun. So, but that's a totally different conversation. Look, if you're training for whatever, whether it's a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, a marathon, your training block is probably going to be anywhere between 12 and maybe 26, maybe even longer, 28 weeks. So that's a quarter to a half of a year. Inevitably in that time, you're going to have travel for something, whether it's work, vacation, maybe whatever. So the very first thing that you need to do once you get your training or your travel booked is, what training do I have to do while I'm on travel? So we came here last Friday and we leave on Friday, so we're going to be here for a total of 7 days. I know that in my training on a 7-day period, I've got 5 runs. So that's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, okay? Now, the very first thing that I do is that I look at my training schedule. I use an app and a website called Training Peaks, and one of the reasons I love it so much is that there's a calendar view. And I open the calendar view and I see what I have to do for each of the runs during that trip. Now, it just so happened that for this trip, it's kind of a down week, so everything's a little bit shorter. I think my longest run is an hour, which is great because it's a little bit easier to plan for that. When you get into the longer blocks, now you got to start packing for, I'll do a separate video on what to pack for. But the very first thing I do once we've got travel booked, whether it's personal or business, is I go into Training Peaks and I look at what my run schedule is and what types of runs I have. So after that, we go on to how do we prep for this. But I want to keep walking because it is so nice out that I don't want to just stay still. And I do still have to go get us breakfast. Okay, the next thing that I consider once I know what my training is what type of travel am I going to be doing? See, this is important because if you're on personal leisure travel, your time is a lot more flexible than if you're on business travel. So if I'm going on a business trip and I know that I've got meetings at 9 a.m. every morning, now I have to prep for my runs to either be early in the morning or after work. And then how am I going to do those? Because if I do them in the morning, I need to be back in enough time to be showered and dressed and ready to meet all of my coworkers at 9. Well, with a trip like this, where it's leisure, I know that we're going to have a little bit lazier mornings and stuff like that, and we're not going to be as pushed for time. So my wife likes to sleep in a little bit when we're on a holiday. I get up a little bit earlier, I go do my runs, I get back, I get showered. A lot of times before she's even awake, or if she is awake, she's just getting rolling, so there's no real impact or no real pressure on my run. Also, with a work trip, it might be easier to just do treadmill running. And if I'm going to do just treadmill running, I'm going to pack differently and I'm going to prep differently. But that is a good segue to the next section. I'm a little bit closer to where I'm picking up the breakfast, so I do want to keep going because I do have some time constraints. The next thing that I look at when I'm looking at my travel and my training is the weather. What's the weather going to be like where I am going? Because it's also important to realize that, like, let's say I'm in Amsterdam and the weather is 10 degrees. 10 degrees in Amsterdam is very different than 10 degrees here in the south of Spain. So you need to look at all of that to figure out, how are you going to dress? What are you going to pack? And again, I'm not going to go into packing in this video. I'm going to do a whole separate video on how I pack for stuff. But I really like to look at the weather so I understand, is it going to be raining? Is it going to be hot? And this goes again on why you need to know, are you going to train in the mornings? Are you going to train in the evenings or in the afternoons? You have to have an understanding of what the weather is going to be like so that you know how to plan for your training. Like right now, it's like 12 degrees, but in the sun it is really hot. Like I am warm. This is significantly different than what I'm training back in Amsterdam. This morning, the training run in Amsterdam would have been at 0 degrees Celsius, so that's right about freezing. If I would have packed preparing for that, I would die. So look at the weather, understand what the weather's going to be like, understand what type of day you're going to be running, so that you know how to prep for that. The first breakfast place I went to didn't have what we wanted, so I'm on to another one. So let's keep going. Okay, now the last thing that I do when figuring out my training while on travel is where and how am I going to run? So you obviously want to look at where you're traveling to and figure out how long you have to run and where you can do that run. Is it safe where you're traveling to? Fortunately, most of our travel is around Europe and everything is fairly safe. But you also have to figure out what type of distances and what path you're going to run, because not all cities are the same. The surfaces are different, the sidewalks are different, the areas are different, the elevation's different. This is where Strava comes in very, very handy. So in Strava, you can go and look at the maps for where you're going, set a distance, and see what the routes are that other people have taken. It's also a good indication of where the best, easiest, most run-conducive areas are, because if you see a loop that has just got a lot of activity, you can pretty much, rely on the fact that it's runnable and stuff like that. If it's an area that, like we were in Aruba and it wasn't really conducive for running outside of the resort, I did most of my runs on the treadmill. Now, I really dislike running on a treadmill, but one, it was like 90 degrees Fahrenheit, almost 100 Fahrenheit. And outside of the resort, the conditions for running, while it was safe, were not really easy. There were no real sidewalks and stuff. So I used Strava there to figure out where to run also, and determine that it was best to do the majority of my runs on the treadmill. But yeah, that's about it. That's how I go about planning my training around and with my travel. Like I said, I'm going to do a whole video on the packing, because that's a whole another thing. But I hope you found this somewhat helpful. It's tried and true for me. Fine tune it and do what works for you. And yeah, until next time, enjoy your run. And if you're about ready to travel, enjoy your vacation. See you soon.